My family have never been very big on ghost stories. I suspect this is because of my grandfather, a Victorian, but despite that, he was a man of science and a teacher, and he really didn't believe in things like that. It was all stuff and nonsense. Except he had a really big thing about Ouija boards. Years ago, when my mother, a new bride from America, came over and met the family, at some point she said she thought it might be rather fun to have a go at the Ouija board, and he got very angry and said no, there were more things in heaven and earth and you shouldn't meddle with them. And that was a surprise to everyone because we really didn't think that he had much sort of belief in anything like that. Possibly the reason for his unhappiness was cousin Mary. There's always one left field one in any family. And Mary had been some sort of an invalid who had been miraculously cured by a visiting spiritualist and faith healer called Pastor something. I really can't remember his name now. And after that, she became a spiritualist herself and used to hold regular Ouija or table tapping sessions, as they called them. There are lots of family stories about this, about making pieces of furniture move or shake. And there's one spectacular one about cousin Wilfrid being chased or frightened by a Welsh dresser. Make of that what you will. At the beginning of the 20th century, most of my family was still living in the East End of London, not far from where the siege of Sydney Street took place in 1911. There was a news blackout at the time, so no one knew exactly what was going on except that the police had been called in, and the army were actually out on the street, and even Winston Churchill was on the scene. People living in the East End at the time were very frightened. A lot of them had escaped pogroms in Eastern Europe, so seeing the army out on the street was a very alarming thing. In fact, the siege of Sydney Street was a jewellery shop robbery committed by a criminal gang that had gone terribly wrong. But word had spread that it was anarchists holed up in the house in Sydney Street and shooting at the police. But no one really knew what was going on because of the news blackout. Which is probably why, at a family table tapping session which we know my grandfather took part in, cousin Mary decided to ask the spirit world who was responsible for the siege of Sydney Street. And the Ouija board spelt out Peter the Painter. This was several days before that name was to appear in the newspapers. And this is what we think was the cause of my grandfather's anxiety about the use of the Ouija board. But despite my grandfather, my father did have his own Ouija board story. It took place during World War II. The youngest pilot in my father's squadron was inevitably known as Babe by all the rest of them. Now, I don't know what it was about Spitfire pilots, but they all seemed to prefer to stay with a damaged plane rather than bail out of it. So Babe stayed with his plane when it was badly damaged on a sortie, and he had to crash land it. He broke both his legs and suffered quite a serious back injury. Babe spent quite a long time in hospital, and then was transferred to a rehabilitation centre for flying officers. Here he was under the constant care of a nurse, who he relied on to get him up and out of bed and around the place in a wheelchair. The evenings were long and dull in the rehab unit. There was, of course, no TV in those days, and I don't think they even had a radio. Babe was in a ward with about 8 or 9 other pilots, all of them far more mobile than he was. They could at least play cards around a table. Babe was still confined to his bed. One night, when some of the others had been playing games with a set of lexicon cards, someone suggested laying these cards out like a Ouija board and holding a séance. They all sat round a table with an upturned glass, placing one finger on top so that no one could steer the glass about or cheat. His nurse had just put Babe back in his bed, so he couldn't play any active part, but she stayed on to watch and see what happened next. At first, nothing happened. They realised they had to actually ask the spirit world something. The questions that they started with were quite simple. Is there anybody there? That sort of thing. And the glass did start to move. Eventually they asked it who would win the war. We will, it spelt out, though no one thought to ask who we might be. Then someone asked, will there be another war? And the glass moved across the table. Y-E-S, it spelt out. Desperate to join in, Babe asked, will I be in it? N-O, the glass spelt out. Why not? Someone asked. And now the glass started to move very rapidly. B-E-C-A-U-S-E-H-E-D-I. And at that point, the nurse screamed and snatched the glass away from the table. Everyone went very quiet. Put the glass back, Babe said. I don't think that's a very good idea, said the nurse. Put the glass back, Babe insisted. I need to know what it was going to say. It was only a bit of fun, they all said. You shouldn't take it seriously. Put the glass back, Babe said. I need to know now. Reluctantly, they put the glass back on the table. Nothing happened. Ask the question again, Babe said. And they asked, if there is another war, why won't Babe be in it? And the glass started to move. Once again, it began to spell out B-E-C-A-U-S-E-H-E-D-I, and everyone held their breath as the glass moved on. D-H-I-S-B-I-T-I-N-T-H-I-S-O-N-E. My father used to occasionally tell that story, but I heard it from Babe himself. His real name was Michael Vincent Francis, and he died in 2009. He was an artist, and a very good one, and you can look up his work online if you'd like to.